there are subtle changes in the way I see a maple flower now than when I did prior to cancer. And I think part of it is also this sensitivity, I would say, to the fact that I really appreciate being able to see it. My life could be very different, but right now I'm here on the planet and I get to see this maple flower. So maybe I spend a little bit more time with it and I notice a few more things about it. Everything that happens to you during that whole process, from diagnosis all the way through. There are so many decisions that need to be made, and there's so many ways you need to advocate for yourself. And the only way that I could describe it or begin talking about it was using language I already had, using a language about the soil, using the language of flowers and plants, using a botanical language to put myself in a landscape that we didn't recognize, but was also a welcoming, warm, supportive place where we didn't have to explain why we needed to be there. We just needed to be there in order to take care of ourselves and each other and heal.
Hello, friends. I'm so honored you're here for another episode of To Hum is Human, the podcast where we explore the transformative power of tuning into our intuition to express our passionate purpose. I'm your host, Donnabelle, and today's episode, Microbial Muse, Painting from the Quiet Intelligence of Nature, invites us into a deeper kind of listening, one that tunes into the unseen and the underground. Together, we'll explore what it means to co-create with nature's subtle intelligence, allowing roots, spores, and microscopic life to shape the rhythms of the brush and the story on the canvas. I'm so excited to introduce my next guest. Malaika Ross is a Caribbean American visual artist whose work is rooted in the living relationship between soil, plants, and Black female identity. Malaika earned her BA from Hampshire College, where she researched the effects of solar arrays on soil microbial activity. In 2019, she transitioned from lab-based inquiry to visual storytelling, using drawing and painting to celebrate the unseen beauty of soil, ecosystems, and botanical forms. Her work uplifts both native and introduced plant species through richly expressive compositions. Malaika's work doesn't just depict nature, it listens to it. It asks us to remember that healing, identity, and creativity emerge from the ground beneath our feet. Welcome, Malaika.
Thank you. So great to be here with you, Donnabelle.
Well, Malaika, you grew up on the island of St. Croix, immersed in nature and nurtured by women who passed on plant-based healing traditions. How did those early experiences shape your connection to the natural world?
I would say that most importantly, it shaped my connection by showing me that there was no separation, that we were both living in and part of the natural world. And that if we took care of the plants, the soil, that it would take care of us. There was never any worry that we wouldn't be able to eat because we had access to land that always provided us some form of food. So the connection is strong.
Well, there's this deep, quiet intelligence in the way that you talk about soil and roots and healing. When you look back, do you see your relationship with the land as a kind of early language or inner compass?
Definitely. So I grew up with my grandmother, who by the time I was growing up with her, all her kids had left. So there was a big age gap between my grandmother and I. And I found that we spent a lot of time being quiet together. So there's this way that she was both in tune and listening to the environment around her and really taking in, visually looking at plants, really figuring out what was going on with plants, what needed attention. And similarly, I found that I was quite quiet and did the similar observations of looking around, looking at the plants. Where was there pooling of water after a thunderstorm? There was not a road, but you could drive around my grandmother's house. You could make this loop around her house. And I found that I
Mm.
did that loop a few times a day when I didn't go to school. I'd wake up in the morning and I'd walk around the house. And then maybe later on in the afternoon, I'd walk around the house. And then usually I took a stroll with my grandfather. We walked around the house. So there
Mm.
was sort of a quiet checking in, because that age gap meant that we couldn't always talk about things that always interest me as a young girl, but
Mhm.
we could perceive and watch nature together and watch how things changed from season to season.
That's such a beautiful memory of having this time with your grandparents and at the same time collectively looking and observing and feeling what was happening around the house. And I can imagine not only visually stunning, but also, as you were mentioning, the pool of water after a storm, just the smells and the fragrances of things growing around. It must have been such a visceral experience for you that kind of created this almost magical place.
Absolutely. And that happened, the first when as you were describing that, it made me think of hurricanes and how many
Mm.
times we had been through a hurricane and how we'd have to stay inside and protect all the windows, but we could hear the rain outside and we would just kind of just listen to the rain and know, "Oh, it's pretty bad out there right now." So there was a lot of listening and
Mm.
perceiving, reflecting.
Or you can say, it's coming, the storm is coming, or it's passing. Like there's something about being really intentional about what your mind and your body are feeling when things are happening around you. And it's such a beautiful practice because I find that going to that quiet space is really something that we try to aim for nowadays. Whereas it seemed like that was just a natural place for you growing up. Hold on. So you studied the impact of solar arrays on microbial soil activity, a very precise lens. Can you tell our listeners what this research entailed and what led you to that type of work?
Oh, wow. You're gonna have to help keep me on track as I explain because it's nonlinear. I'll just say that I was lucky enough. So I'll start at the beginning of what I consider my third or fourth chapter in terms of completing my bachelor's degree. But I was very fortunate to be able to live on the big island of Hawaii. And while I was there, I was preparing to be readmitted to Hampshire College because the first time that I was at Hampshire, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to pursue, as many people their first
Uh-huh.
time at Hampshire. But I had an opportunity to live on the big island of Hawaii, and I also wanted to spend a lot of that time preparing to go back and complete my degree. The Div 1 that I needed to complete was my natural science Div 1. So I enrolled in a lot of natural science courses while I was on the Big Island at the University of Hawaii in Hilo. And one of those courses was sustainable agriculture. We talked a lot about soil in that class, and something just woke up inside of me. It's very hard to describe. It wasn't just like a light bulb going off in my head, it felt more on a cellular level, like a
Mm.
waking up all over. And I had at that time realized, wait a minute, there's this connection that I have with soil from my grandparents because my grandmother was a small scale farmer. She had a kitchen garden and then she also grew root vegetables. So I spent a
Mm.
lot of time watching her plant and spend time with soil. And it was like I was just reminded while doing my coursework that that's where I come from. I'm from a family that treasures the soil, that respects the soil. And so when I reapplied to Hampshire, I had completed a lot of all of my natural science requirements. And then I had an opportunity while there to work on a project that was already funded, and I was asked to be part of it. I was lucky enough that I could design my Div 3 around this project. And the pieces of information that were needed for this study had to do with microbial activity under solar arrays. And the reason for that was to determine whether the soil under the arrays would still be viable farmland or whether after so many years of lack of water, which happens, the solar panels are covering soil, so they're not getting as much water as they would if the solar panels weren't there. And also lack of sunlight and also lack of plant communities who can help build microbial communities within the soil that help support a diverse landscape, diverse plant communities. So I was lucky enough to be part of that study, and I jumped on it because it deeply resonated with me and it was something that I wanted to learn. And you asked a bit about what that entailed, a lot of lab work, a
Mm,
lot of soil sampling, and then there were these plates and you put a substrate, it's called a slurry, which is basically soil and water mixed together, and you put them in different parts of the plate that have different substrates in them, different sources of food for the microbes,
mm,
and you want to see how active they are over a period of 5 to 7 days. And so the samples were taken both under the solar array and adjacent to the solar. So under the solar array, there was no water, no sunlight, limited plant communities. Adjacent, a lot more plants, a lot more water, sunlight. Definitely an environment that could sustain life. So, as you probably could guess, there was more microbial activity adjacent than
mm.
under. I did very small piece over the course of 8 months of this study. So that was my contribution. So someone would need to go in and say hydrology and then look at that array over the course of 20 years.
Well, it's fascinating because when you think about solar arrays, the concept of harnessing the power of the sun to fuel other things within our lives. But of course, having these man made technological things will have an impact if they're introduced in nature. And you're actually removing light from what's underneath the arrays. So it's kind of an interesting problem to work with because you want to also maintain the health of the soil that it's in, right?
Right.
What a incredible research angle to take regarding
Yeah.
soil health. Was there a moment, though, where you realized that you didn't want to just study the soil and the natural world when you actually wanted to paint it? What changed for you, both in your
Mm.
body, your rhythm, or your sense of purpose?
What changed was realizing that in order for me to continue to pursue soil microbiology as a career, I would need to get my master's and I would need to get my PhD and I would need to spend a considerable amount of time inside, which essentially would be an office, the lab. And where I thrived was being outside, getting soil samples, looking at plant communities in different areas of the solar array and wondering why those plants were growing there and not growing in other places. I had already spent about 28 years at that time working in offices as an administrative assistant, executive assistant, project operations assistant. So I knew that life and I was just called to be outside more and spend more time outside. And I
Mm.
struggled with that, but I knew that being outside and observing was a form of science as well, whether or
Oh,
not I had been handed that master's or PhD,
mm.
that just like my grandparents and my great grandmother, that they were involved in a scientific process. And
Absolutely.
I,
I mean,
yeah,
there's
yeah,
an understanding and there's a recording and a logic really gauging what works and what doesn't work and how things are affected by what's planted around them. And there's so many variables there that someone who doesn't necessarily need to have a degree for, but has this inherent knowledge that has accumulated over time and observation. I think that's really important to state. I could just see you saying, "Wait a second, why am I in this lab where there's probably no windows, right? Or very little natural light coming in when the real stuff that I want to be with is outdoors in its natural environment." And so did you feel like was there a resistance or either internal or external when you stepped away from the science aspect toward a more intuitive and expressive practice?
yeah, there was a resistance intellectually. I'd grown up to believe that my mom has her PhD. So it's sort of like you don't arrive until you have your, your bachelor's is just the start. But really, getting your PhD is you just need to keep going on that academic track. And so there was a lot of intellectual resistance, but emotionally, and I'd say in terms of my soul, and in terms of my gut, it really felt like it was much healthier
Mm.
to not go down that path and, more affordable as well, probably.
Yeah. Well, there seemed like a lot
Yeah,
of factors, but
yeah,
obviously when you're saying you're trusting your gut, you just know that perhaps one person's path is their path, but this is my path. And to
yeah,
actually accept the path too. So sometimes we go through life saying, well, I'm living the path that my parents told me to do versus
yeah,
I'm going to
yeah,
actually
yeah,
follow
yeah,
my own path, and
yeah.
surrendering to that is it's a big step in our.
It is a big step. It's scary. It's really, really scary. Yeah, because 'cause you're not sure, right? You're not sure how it's all gonna turn out.
Mhm.
And someone's saying, "Here's the formula, the formula is this, and we promise you success
Mm.
in 15 years." You're taking a much riskier route, going this way, and you have no guarantees. But really, the truth is there are no guarantees.
I agree. There are no guarantees, so why not follow what really lights you up, right? To a
Yeah,
place where you feel
yeah.
fulfilled. Now, talking about your artwork now, because I know that your training as a soil scientist, again, offers quite a bit of precision and exactitude. And in some ways, there are elements of that in your work, but they seem to breathe. Your paintings to me seem to
Mm.
breathe. They kind of bring a life to the forms that you're depicting. And they don't feel like illustrations of microbes or plants, but they feel like conversations with them. What does a painting begin with for you? Do you start with an image or a memory or a sensation? How do you go about starting a painting?
Well, I start each day starting in about the middle of spring. Whenever we start to get spring flowers and then the trees start flowering, that's when I'm out every day at the usually the start of the morning, and I try and find different places where I can walk. And I go out and I just look. And also it's very really quiet in the mornings a lot of times. So I go out and I look and I see what's happening, what's blooming, and something attracts me. And I go towards it and I
Mm.
get real close to it. And then I usually take it. So
You're coming with
I don't
me.
take a large route. I don't take a large route, but and I thought about, do I ask permission? Should I be asking permission? But I think there is this, it's almost like the plant or the tree knows, I'm not going to take all of you. I'm just going to take part of you and I'm going to honor that part. So I'll take a really small part. And then I make a promise to myself that within 2 days, at the very most, I will begin drawing it and then I'll begin painting it. And so it doesn't go, so that that picking of the flower or the branch doesn't go to waste. So I bring it back to my studio and I have a magnifying glass and I look at it under the magnifying glass and I begin to sketch. And then I will sketch in graphite and then I will get a piece of watercolor paper and an ink pen and I will draw onto the paper and I commit to it. I commit to whatever comes out. I don't put it aside and try again. I go with what comes the first time around and I just let it be. And then I choose my color palette and I think about that for a little while. And then once I've chosen the color palette, I'll start working with the ink drawing and painting on that watercolor paper with the ink drawing. Usually I still have the plant in water on my drawing desk. And there's this point at which there is a communication, I think, because I'm no longer referencing the plant or the flower. I'm referencing the painting and there's a dialogue and it's really hard to describe, but it's interesting because the representation of the flower or the plant that I'm painting feels more like what it wants to communicate to me it is or how it wants to be seen or how it
Mm.
wants to be treasured or how it
Mm.
wants to, like when we're zooming by in our cars, how it wants to be thought of as we're driving past and we see it, we can't stop. But are we remembering that it's there and are we taking into account its existence in our daily choices? It doesn't want to be forgotten. It's sort of like don't forget me. You're moving so fast. There's a lot of beauty here. So those are some of the things I think I feel or see or experience as I'm painting.
Well, the sounds like you work mostly from life. That you don't work from
Yeah.
photographs. So that in itself is capturing. You literally have a limited amount of time to capture them in this state of where they are, because after a while they will decay, they will start drooping, they will start losing their color. And so to be able to be in that moment, to almost just commune with that particular flower or that particular branch for that period of time is like a meditation. And it's almost like you're honoring this particular species, this particular plant in this moment. And what a beautiful tribute to have then a final drawing or a painting afterwards to record that moment. Do you feel like your paintings and drawings are more records than they are necessarily a painting of flowers or plants?
I feel like my sketches are more the record.
Mm.
This is the shape. These are the lines. This is the pollen. That's the petal. But then the painting feels more like this is what I have to say. This is what I want you to tell them. This is how I want you to bring them in and attract them to me. Or this is kind of how you connect me to my people that will like take care of me. My humans that will value me. This is how through me, this is how I'd like for you to communicate with them.
Hmm. That's
Um,
such a beautiful way of putting that, because I feel like in that translation of you looking through that big magnifying glass lens, it is your perspective that you're bringing to that particular natural form, and to then bring in your story with the story of this particular plant. Because when I see the paintings, they're so vibrant and lush, and the colors are so engaging and electric. Where do your colors come from? Do they come from the Caribbean? Because they feel very much island inspired, just the brightness, the colors.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I made this huge shift. I was drawing soil microbes and then I started using color. And, Donnabelle, I'm not quite sure what happened. I don't know if it was me learning a new visual language or if it was that in communicating with this flower, it also taught me about myself as a kid and as an adult. I mostly wore gray clothes, black, gray, white. Now I've started wearing more colors. I used to be afraid of color. So
Interesting.
I wonder if perhaps it's also a healing for me as well.
And it's almost like you're
Um,
bringing the life of the flower into you, in the way you express yourself. Like your palette that you then project yourself has changed through your work with the palette that these natural forms bring. And I feel like that's such a
yeah.
beautiful conversation now that you mention that. Now, in 2023, your practice expanded in a powerful new direction with the Visibility Project and Novel Bodies and Novel Landscapes following your breast cancer diagnosis. Can you share how these series emerged and what they've taught you about the body and healing and transformation?
Yeah. So when I got my breast cancer diagnosis, I thought this will all get wrapped up in a month and I'll just get right back to my life doing my botanical paintings. And it took about a year and a half post diagnosis, which includes a diagnosis, the trips to Boston, the phone, I was on the phone a lot with doctors, surgery. And then I lost some mobility in my right shoulder, which I still struggle with, and I'm right-handed. So luckily, my right hand still works fairly well. I do have some numbness in my fingers still. They're not sure why. So I'm in a new body. I mean, I'm not in a new body, but there's an edit. There was an edit and some things changed. And I had, during the time that I was in recovery from my surgery, And also just at the start of of diagnosis, I started journaling. I would journal about how I was feeling. I would journal about how scared I was. I would journal about the fact that I need to find some way to calm my nervous system because I was so terrified and afraid because I just wasn't sure how long I would have to live. I don't think we all are not sure, but being diagnosed with breast cancer gives you like one clear thing where you can say, okay, I can see how I might die. And it shifted my perspective about my art and myself, my body, my life. And I wasn't able in that year and a half to make work. But as soon as I could make work, finished up my last physical therapy or started physical therapy, probably, I started to draw. And I had already made a list as I was journaling about all the different ways my life had changed. And so I was able to track 42 ways it had changed: nutrition, exercise, surgery. I mean, a whole list: family, friends, mortality, medication. And I started making work about that. I guess a couple things changed. I felt literally that the way I saw the natural world changed and the way that I moved in it changed. And I also realized that there were a lot of women who had had breast cancer who had had surgery but were covered. So there was no way to know, and not that I necessarily needed to, but it was like I didn't know who else had experienced this and felt that they had to hide it.
Mm.
And so that's how the Visibility Project grew. It was sort of like there are a lot of us because it's 1 in 8 women. So there are a lot of us, but we don't know who we are. And we're kind of invisible. And it's a scary topic to talk about. So a lot of us don't talk about it because it's scary to talk about it. So it just made me think, wow, we're invisible in a lot of ways. 1 in 8, but can count eight people, or 10, or let's just say 16, but I don't know who else might have had breast cancers. The Visibility Project grew out of that, grew out of feeling like there was a need for us to be seen and connected to each other. And then I learned that a lot of us were making art. And I thought, well, gosh, like, why am I not seeing this art? Are we hiding it? Are we afraid to show it? And also, we're moving around in a world and in a landscape that's very different than what other people might think. I have limited mobility, which means there's certain things like when I'm walking in the grocery store, I have to ask for help to reach certain things if I need to do it with my right hand for some reason. So there's a lot to kind of unpack there, but that's where the Visibility Project, that's what it grew out of. And Novel Bodies, Novel Landscapes grew out of the fact that there are a lot of us who've had medical intervention that has transformed our bodies. I personally got aesthetic flat closure. There are other people who have gotten aesthetic flat closure. And for me, it's on one side. For some people, it's on both were removed and they're aesthetically flat. Novel Bodies, Novel Landscapes, where our lives have been transformed by cancer, and we're moving in the world in a different way and with a different mindset and with different experiences. And sometimes we have to take medications that can alter our perception of the world a bit. We're also seeing things a little bit differently as well. So Novel Bodies, Novel Landscapes grew out of that. Things look a little different to me now that I'm on my medication. I'm not hallucinating, but there are subtle changes in the way I see a maple flower now than when I did prior to cancer. And I think part of it is also this sensitivity, I would say, to the fact that I really appreciate being able to see it. My life could be very different, but right now I'm here on the planet and I get to see this maple flower. So maybe I spend a little bit more time with it and I notice a few more things about it.
Thank you for sharing that story because I know some people may not have the courage to speak as you do. And hopefully, as they listen to this particular podcast, that perhaps maybe that will inspire them to be more open to possibly sharing their stories. It gives them a sense of belonging because they're not the only ones out there. And I feel like you saying this today really opens the door for that and allows that to really happen. And I love that your artwork then became a mode of healing, a way in which you could tell your story and heal in the process in ways that most of us probably would never have understood. But you expressing that has helped, it sounds like, for you to come at this diagnosis and sort of your new way of life now in a different way. I see your work as these incredibly gentle but firm and strong, but there's also a wisdom that's within these paintings of yours. It's this inherent wisdom
Mhm.
about them. And you explore this link between soil, plants, and Black femininity. And one thing I did notice is that you started including yourself in the paintings. It wasn't just about the botanical life, it was about you in with that. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how that transformed your way of working?
Yes, and that's still in progress. It's very hard, or I get nervous about, I should say, including myself. But it feels very important that I include myself. In a way, I really do have to push myself, Donnabelle, to put myself in there. It is autobiographical on some level, and on some levels, it's not. I think that there is a lack, and I've personally experienced a lack of Black women in contemporary art in a way that they're both powerful and also vulnerable, but not in a way that one needs to feel bad for them, more in a truth telling. You know, I grew up being taught I had to always be strong and do everything on my own and not let anyone see when things were hard. You just push through. And I think that it's important to also remember that as Black women, we need support in those moments when we need help. I'm searching for the words that about, because it's, I guess the way that I can say it is this way. When I got my diagnosis, I was single, no family in the area, and I found myself being the project manager. I had some help, but I had no family to offer that support. And when I went to get treatment in Boston, I found that there are very few Black women in the waiting room. Then again, I felt by myself. And then when I got treatment, there was a research study being done on Black women because there wasn't enough data on Black women and breast cancer. So again, I'm contributing all the data that they collect on me to this research, but it was yet another reminder of you're alone. And so I thought, I can't be the only one feeling this way. What about other Black women who are feeling alone, don't know who to turn to for help, and would like to be able to see themselves in this novel environment we find ourselves in this novel situation we find ourselves in, but be connected. And so the work that I'm doing now by putting myself in my work is both for me, but also to show up for other Black
Mm,
women who find themselves feeling alone in a new body and in a novel landscape and seeing the world differently. And it's very hard to explain everything that happens to you during that whole process from diagnosis. There are so many decisions that need to be made, and there's so many ways you need to advocate for yourself. And the only way that I could describe it or begin talking about it was using language I already had, using a language about the soil, using the language of flowers and plants, using a botanical language to put myself in a landscape that we didn't recognize, but was also a welcoming, warm, supportive place where we didn't have to explain why we needed to be there. We just needed to be there in order to take care of ourselves and each other and heal.
mm. Such a powerful statement and way of expressing that through your work. And in essence, perhaps creating landscapes where then you reclaim your emotional space, your physical space, your identity space, and your spiritual space. It is a way in which that container can hold you, but also hopefully hold others and support others who may be feeling that. And I can't even imagine what it was like for you, but I'm happy to see you here now with me today to talk about it. And it's such a joy and a privilege to have you speak about this. There are so many parts of life that are lessons for us, and some of those lessons can be very challenging and can really take us to a different place within our own way of being. And I feel like this has been quite a journey for you. And to be able to express that in a way where, yes, there is strength and resilience, but also vulnerability, it's a delicate balance. And it's one that I can see will propel
Yeah.
you still for quite a while. There's so much there in your healing and healing for others that is just such a beautiful gift to this world. I really feel that. If you could offer a message to your younger self digging in the dirt in St. Croix or
Hmm.
looking through a microscope in college, what would you want that younger Malika to know about what's possible through creative listening?
To my younger self, I would say continue to spend time in nature, quietly in nature. Listen, write down what you hear and do it. Listen, write down what you hear and do whatever it is that you're hearing from the natural world, whatever it's asking you to do or be or show or tell or share. Yeah.
Well, if the microbes could whisper a message to us all right now, what might they say about collective healing or regeneration?
I think they would say you need to every day take your shoes off, put your feet on the soil, on wet soil, on wet soil. If you can, bring water with you, wet the soil, put your feet on the wet soil, stand on it, and then also put your hands, sit down and put your hands on the wet soil and rub it all over your hands, rub it all over your feet. And that's like all you need to do every day. That's like all you need to do every day. Just make sure, your feet and your hands get some soil up.
Hmm. And there's something about
Um,
just connecting with nature.
exactly. Just connecting with nature.
Malika, how do folks find out what you're up to? Where can they find more information about you and what's going on in your world?
The best place would be to go to my website, malaikaross.com, and there I have a lot of information about what I'm doing. And I'm going to be working on a new project. And so I will, as I roll that out, I'll give updates there. So malaikaross.com. And I'm also on Instagram at malaikaross_studio.
And you have a Substack too. You do a lot of
And I
writing.
have a Substack, and I thank you, Donnabelle. I have a Substack as well. I actually have two, but I'm spending more time writing about the Visibility Project and also novel bodies, novel landscapes. I'm writing about both the images that I create. I'm writing about them there, and I'm still learning Substack. But it's the Visibility Project / novel bodies, novel landscapes. And you can find that through my website as well. At the very bottom of the website, it is a link to my Substacks. So
Well,
yes, please follow me on my Substack.
my goodness, you have so many beautiful projects coming up and currently happening. Malika, I thank you for sharing your vibrant vision and grounded wisdom with us today. Your art reminds us that there is a sacred intelligence in the stillness, in the soil, and in our own becoming. And you've given us a powerful invitation to listen more deeply to nature, to ancestry, and to the quiet knowing within. I so appreciate you being on the show today.
Thank you, Donnabelle. It was great to be here with you.
Thanks for being here. I hope something from today's conversation stayed with you or gave you a new way to look at things. That awareness, that pause, that's where things start to shift. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with someone who might need it. You can learn more about my work and what's coming up at sonorouslight.com, and you can follow me on Instagram at @tohumishuman. Until next time, keep humming.